Today on MuscleCar, learn how to blow a subframe apart for a suspension rebuild as our 70 Camaro gets some factory upgrades. Then get a look at the dirty underbelly of car restoration. Plus a former rust bucket rises from the dead. And Project Limelight gets a 12-bolt rear.
Hey guys, welcome to MuscleCar. Project Limelight is back in the shop for the next step in the transformation from a basic bare-bones RS into a full-blown big block SS.
Today we're going to replace the old suspension, steering, and brakes, and to go with that 396 that's dropping in, we plan to upgrade the rear axle to a 12-bolt. Since this is a stock style build, we plan to use parts that look as close to the originals as we can.
We picked up this 70 RS Camaro in California, hoping that it would be a solid foundation. And boy, did it pay off. The floorboards look almost new.
We blew it apart and pulled out the old 307 to make way for the 396 we're going to rebuild.
After having it blasted, we took care of some sheet metal damage, patched in a rust spot, then got the body ready for the first coat of primer. With all the bodywork roughed in, it's time to turn our attention to suspension. First, we need to strip the subframe down to its bones, just like a Thanksgiving Day turkey.
A lot of these parts will be replaced or upgraded, but some of the hardware will be reused, so we'll keep it all organized. Once the subframe is bare, only 4 bolts have to come out to separate it from the body for cleanup and paint.
The original control arms were blasted, painted, and had new stock bushings and ball joints pressed in, so they're ready to bolt back in place. We removed the old small block mounts earlier to make way for these shorter big block mounts. And next up are the coil springs. There's more to installing these things than just bolting them in. They need to be compressed, but without the weight of the engine and the rest of the car to help us, we're going to need a specialty tool, and that's where spring compressor comes in. Now, this isn't a tool that most guys are likely to have laying around the shop. In fact, we don't even have one. We rented this one from our local auto parts store. Just make sure to ask them for an internal compressor if your springs install into the frame like these. The safest way to use this tool is to preload the spring using a hand ratchet. Then you can finish the job with an air ratchet. Don't use an impact. You can damage the tool and even cause serious injury. Now, once it's compressed enough to fit, slide it into the spring pocket and use a jack to support the control arm while the spindle is bolted in place. If you don't like the idea of compressing the springs yourself, you can take them to a shop and have them banded. Then just cut the bands off once the spindle is bolted to the A-arm. Before you remove the tool, make sure the springs are seated into the pockets correctly. Otherwise, you'll have to repeat this whole procedure. We're replacing the standard shocks with GM's heavy-duty versions from YearOne. These are correct ones for our F41 suspension upgrade.
We rebuilt our original steering box, so it's going right back where it came from. For a video clip detailing this rebuild, visit the MuscleCar page of PowerBlockTV.com. Now we can start tying the two sides together, starting with the idler arm, which is hooked to the steering box by the center link. The outer tie rod ends connect to the spindle, and the inner tie rod ends connect to the center link. This front steer setup marks a big improvement over the first gen's rear steer.
Coming up, how to pack bearings easy without getting greasy. And later, a Charger RT 440 6-pack.
Hey guys, welcome back. When you're doing a stock restoration, well, sometimes you have to make a decision between exact originals or close reproductions. Now, if you're doing a chalk mark numbers matching kind of build, well, then it's obvious. You have to go with the exact correct parts. But if you're going with a driver style build like we are with Limelight, well, compromise can be good. Take the brake rotors, for example. The originals have a wear indicator groove and part numbers cast right in, whereas the repops don't. But we'd really rather not use the original because it could be warped, cracked. I mean, honestly, who knows? So we're going to go with a safer alternative and use the aftermarket one, even if it's not quite exactly correct.
Hey, cuz, to keep your hands clean, I can take care of the bearings.
Oh, cool. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. I'll go get the sway bar ready to go.
Good deal. I've shown you before how to pack bearings the old-fashioned way, but today I'm going to get it done without the mess with a Matco bearing packer. With the reservoir full of royal purple bearing grease, all I have to do is drop in a bearing face down and press on the plunger. Check to make sure you can see the grease oozing through all the gaps. Then you know it's ready to go in the rotor. Gently tap in the seal, flip it over, and fill the hub with some more grease. Drop in the outer bearing and the rotor is ready to install. When installing new wheel bearings, it's important to set the preload, or you may end up having to replace them again. You set them too tight, they'll build heat and burn up. Too loose, they'll move around on the spindle, tearing themselves apart. With the rotor set in place on the spindle, wrench it down good and tight to set the bearing on the shaft. Back off the nut about a half turn, then snug it back down, making sure the rotor can be turned by hand. And don't forget the cotter pin and the grease cap. Before I finish up by installing the caliper, I'm going to clean the braking surface with some cleaner. New rotors are shipped with a waxy coating, and if you don't remove it, it can clog up your pads. A couple of swipes is all it takes. Then I can drop on the caliper.
The last piece we're going to add to the front end is a sway bar. Now, most Camaros came from the factory with a 15/16 bar, but if you ordered a big block, then you got the F41 suspension package along with a much beefier 1¼ inch bar. It uses the same mounting holes, and the bushings will even fit the original brackets. Installing a sway bar is pretty straightforward. If you're doing this by yourself, a jack comes in handy for some extra support. Greasing the bar or bushings before they go on will prevent squeaks. Use the jack to raise the bar into position, then tighten the bolts a few turns just to hold everything in place. We'll leave all the bolts loose until the car is at right height to prevent binding.
Up next, this baby's a beauty, but she's no trailer queen. And later, Rick loses control of his rear end. Today's Flashback, a 1970 Charger RT.
I was playing pool at a tavern with a barmaid named Rotten Tooth Ruth, and a man pulled up in a Ford short bed pickup truck with something really radical under the hood.
It was a 446 pack, much like the one growling beneath the hood of the 70 Charger RT. The owner of the truck was selling a Charger, this one in fact, but it didn't look anything like it does now.
It had a chicken coop on top and enough clothes to start a yard sale inside of it. It was in pretty bad shape. It didn't run.
The original motor was gone, so Bill traded a camper top and a set of race slicks for the rust bucket. After taking it home and trying to fix it up, he soon realized he was in way over his head, and it sat in a barn for 20 years.
When he finally got to work restoring it, he discovered the car originally had a 446 pack, the same motor in that old pickup. Now, Bill found one out of a junk Super Bee, and the frame-off resto wound up taking over 4 years.
70 was the first time the 6-pack was offered. You could only order it on the RT, and just 684 got it. The 3 Deuces helped churn out 390 horsepower, and it had more low-end torque than the Hemi.
A Hurst pistol grip shifter gave you marksman-like control. RTs were made for road or track, so you got extra heavy-duty suspension, rolling on a set of F70/14 wide tread tires. Plus, there was that nifty race-style gas cap.
The Charger's design had evolved quite a bit since it was introduced in '66.
The leader is here. New Dodge Charger, the dream car that had to see the light of day.
Built as a fastback on the Coronet chassis, it was part street machine and part family car. It sold okay, but really took off in '68 when the second gen was unveiled. Sleeker body lines and more aggressive front end gave it that signature look.
The 70 Charger was the last of the second gen design, and changes, well, they were subtle. It still had those groovy hidden headlights, but a new wraparound chrome bumper was added. RT models now had simulated side scoops. In the rear, the taillight housing stretched the full width of the tail panel.
The car was originally ordered by soldiers stationed overseas. It was labeled for export on the door jamb and under the hood, even though it never left the States.
That soldier was just looking for a fast ride, so the only options besides the 6-pack are a set of race gauges and an 8-track. He did choose a pretty wild interior though, the rare shade of burnt orange.
When Bill restored the car, he wanted it to be just the way that soldier ordered it, which means this baby is a road warrior.
I enjoy driving it. As far as I'm concerned, trailers are for boats.
After the break, when it rains, it pours. You're watching MuscleCar. For a DVD copy of this episode, just go to PowerBlockTV.com and order your copy for just $5.95 plus shipping and handling. Start your own MuscleCar collection, delivered right to your door from the Power Block.
Hey, welcome back to MuscleCar. Earlier in the show, we got our front end assembled to our subframe, but before we can bolt it under the car, we've got to get some paint on the undercarriage.
And that means it's time for the old rear end to come out. And when you're pulling heavy parts off a vehicle that's being supported like this, make sure you keep your weight balance in mind. If you pull off a heavy part like a front subframe, it's going to make the vehicle tail heavy. So you're either going to have to support the back end or add weight to the nose, like we did.
Since we're replacing everything, it's easiest just to pull it all out in one big chunk. All we have to do is unbolt the leaf springs, shocks, and brake line, and the whole assembly drops right out.
So back. Got it. The undercarriage of a car is an area that most people don't really put a lot of thought into, but a true rebuild isn't complete without giving it some attention. Now, this car came from the factory with a lacquer-based sealer primer. We could roll it into the booth and reapply it, but I know of an easier, cheaper alternative.
Build on a budget. MuscleCar projects that save you time and money.
Enamel-based aerosol is going to give us a look that's very close to the original. Dupli-Color semi-gloss engine enamel is perfect for this job. It's tough, washable, heat-resistant, and it's going to give us the look we're after. But first, we got to do some cleanup. 40 years of grunge needs to hit the floor before we can even think about paint. No high-tech tools here, just scrapers, cleaner, and a whole bunch of elbow grease.
Tell you what, guys, if you can do this outside with a pressure washer, I would highly recommend it. Doing it inside on the lift took longer since we had to use pump sprayers. Not to mention, it made a real mess that we had to clean up later.
It's important to get the moisture out of all the nooks and crannies by either using compressed air or a lot of drying time.
Next, we'll hit the bare metal spots with some Dupli-Color etch primer. It'll help the top coat adhere better. Once it's all prepped and etched, we can beautify it with the semi-gloss enamel.
One of the reasons we chose this product is it covers really quick. We shot the entire undercarriage with a single coat, and you can see what a difference it makes.
The original rear end that we pulled out earlier was just a standard GM 10-bolt, which isn't a bad rear end, but we're going to go one step better with a 12-bolt. Now, 1970 was the only year of the second gen that this option was available, and it was only available on the SS's and the Z28s, so they're not easy to come by.
But we didn't have to look far, because Moser Engineering sent us their 12-bolt MusclePak. It's a complete rear end assembly with brakes and model-specific purchase already installed, so all you have to do is pick your options and bolt it in.
Attaching the leaf springs to the front mounts before the axle goes in makes installation a whole lot easier. Now, our Rally Sport came from the factory with standard springs, but the performance package calls for heavy-duty ones, so YearOne hooked us up with the correct set. Now, we had some options when we ordered up our Moser MusclePak, including gear ratios and brakes. Now, they do have some great disc brake packages, but in 1970, Camaros only came with drum brakes, so we ordered up stock replacements.
They also offer a wide range of gear ratios. A 70 SS could have been ordered with a 410, but we wanted this thing a little more streetable, so we went with the 355s, which was standard on the SS. After bolting the leaf springs into the shackles, we can adjust the position of the rear end over the springs.
Pretty good right there, Rick. If you want to come on up with it. Pretty good on my side too. You ready?
Yep.
If you're doing this on your garage floor, you'd lower the rear end onto the springs. But since we're working on a lift, we'll raise the car to the rear end. Once it's in place, we can cinch it all down with new U-bolts, making sure to install our new pads and sway bar mounts. Now it's ready for the rear sway bar. Everything we need to install the Moser MUSCLEPAK, including shocks, sway bar, and all the hardware, came straight from YearOne.
Since our Camaro didn't come with a sway bar, we need to add a couple of holes in the frame rails to finish the install. With the rear suspension done, all we need is some wheels and a subframe bolted back under, and we'll have us a roller ready for a big block.
The completed front clip goes on just as easy as it came off, with 4 bolts, some Loctite Threadlocker, and a new set of body bushings.
We've made a lot of progress on Project Limelight today. Now we've got a completely rebuilt front end, a 12-bolt rear, upgraded springs and sway bars, and not to mention a great looking bottom side. Now we can put together that L78 big block, but we're all out of time for today. So until next time, y'all keep it between the ditches.